Hi, loving visionaries. This is Chris Parr from Miraculi Healing, and thank you for being here today. Today we'll be discussing the complexities of adolescent shame. We will recognize and acknowledge teenage trauma and pain and why it is just too shameful and difficult to face for you. What is unique of those adolescent years? What shame does during those years, which is different than other times of your life? What does shame do to you? Accumulative shame shifts. Often shame shifts during these adolescent years. It can become more overt or covert. The panic of growing up makes the teenage years very unique. The panic of growing up is the whole psychology and biology of sex, sexuality, sexual preference, and teenager have to deal with that. Go to talk to mom and dad. Are you crazy? Or it is still too much for you to ask for help. Shame is one of the very few, if not only, melodies that requires both the asking for and the receiving of help. Or if it is for you to recognize and acknowledge the dynamic quality opposed to the static quality you assume. Or the patience isn't there. You see, a lot of people are afraid of intensity and afraid of patience, and society tends to discourage both intensity and patience, and therefore many learn of their shame but don't follow through. They just don't do it completely and follow through. How remorse isn't just an abstraction, it's a foundation that is lacking in teenagers. To recognize and acknowledge any of those examples or your reasons that you tend to ignore the most significant area of shame of all, adolescent shame. To recognize and acknowledge that when you have shame, it impacts not just what you think, but the way you think, or your own reasons, independent of those reasons of why shame is intricate and interwoven so tightly together and so complex for you. Or the intensity was just too frightening, with the gut-tightening feeling choking you up like a wet rag being wrung out in your chest. The shame of children versus the shame of adolescence. If the shame occurred in your infancy or in your childhood and continues uncontested, it will slam right into these adolescent years. Everything is larger than life for a teenager. And for a teenager, it's important. When you are 14, if you can't wear the right clothes or shoes to school, I am devastated. Imagine what death, divorce, or abandonment, or being sexually abused or beaten before the school does to a teenager. Like the poor boy, I prefer to die. Imagine how much pain and shame if you go to school with a black eye or a bloody lip and say, oh, I fell off my bike, but no scratches on your hands or legs. Or you can tell I fell down the stairs even though mom and dad threw you down the stairs. It is more powerful and impactful. When a 3-year-old loses his father through divorce or death, everyone around is worried. But when a 15-year-old loses a parent through divorce or death, you are practically an adult. You can deal with it. No one pays attention to it. The pain is just as deep, if not deeper, in many ways. This is because they better understand abandonment and the emotions that surround it. Emotional, mental, and physical violence is just as powerful and hard-hitting. A child who is thrown down the stairs, who is beaten, suffocated, and burnt, often wants to come back to fix whatever he has done wrong. That's what shame has done to them. But the teenager who asked this impact is more powerful, and his life is devastating when it happens during these years. The pain matures and sparks inside. Similarly, being wrong, whatever the wrong is, these cause of being taught, being abandoned, that level of abandonment, to be abused, either physical, emotional, mental, or sexual, being wronged, produce that shame more potently and impactful. The effects of shame are always the same, but are more powerful or lasting during adolescence. The effects you are stripped of, the gifts of human beings, of thinking, of imagine, of creating, of perception, of conception, of feeling, of knowing, your needs and desires, of healing, of love, of care, etc. Those are the gifts of the human gifts, and you are stripped of them. You see, when a 3-year-old is robbed of their capacity to perceive, not a whole lot is gone. But when a 15-year-old are robbed of their ability to perceive, a lot is missing. Yes, the lack that happened at 3 does show up at 15, and that's exactly the point. A child is not very fond of healing, but a teenager might be if he hadn't been hurt by shame a long time ago. Your ability to know your needs and wants for a child is one thing, but seeing it steal from you as a teenager has more impact and reach than when it happened in those earlier years. Your chemistry is altered by shame, yes, but during the rage of hormones of puberty, there is also the rage of chemistry. And if that chemistry is based on shame, there is a rage of chemistry based on the shame that does not occur in child or toddler. Yes, you feel separated from yourself, but frankly, a 2-year-old doesn't think too much about what it means to be apart from himself. But a 12-year-old always does. You are separated from your spirituality. But you see, as a child, you're enveloped in a spirituality that surrounds you. And then, year after year, it decreases into those years of adolescence. So being separated from your spirituality can impact you, right, throughout your life. Feeling that you are imperfect and cannot be fixed and therefore cannot ask for help and cannot receive help means more to a teenager than to a child and a newborn. They think the only solution is to fix the world or leave the world, so be ashamed and pass it on. You see, few children are capable of shaming, but teenagers do. If the shame occurred in your infancy or childhood and continues unchallenged, it will extend into adolescence. For this reason, these special years are so important. Shame can be incredibly difficult to handle, but if you slowly unravel it, you can deal with it and understand why it is so difficult for you. What is unique of those adolescent years? What shame does during these years, which is different than any other time of your life? Then, of course, the technique is simple to end it, which is unique to these adolescent years. Techniques that are unique to the child part of yourself. So what happens during those adolescent years that makes shame so peculiar, so unique at that time? During that time of puberty, for some, it starts at 11 or 12, or whenever that biological puberty activates. It's when you reach that incredible time, which is called teenage years. 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 years old. Some spill over or start sooner, but mostly it is in that period. What is unique, first of all, the cause of shame are always the same. They are more potent and impactful during the teenage adolescent years. The cause of shame, we talked to them frequently. You were taught by the superhuman parent, the perfect adult, overachieving, over accomplishing, demanding perfection from your parent, who teaches you that you are flawed and defective if you're not as good as them. You at age 3, you at age 6, you at age 13 are not as capable enough as your so-called perfect mother or perfect father. You are flawed and defective. That superhuman parent often teaches you that you being flawed is what is true about you. Or the subhuman parent, the raging parent, the alcoholic parent, the abusive parent, the shameless parent, then their subhuman behavior, indirectly and often very directly, teach you that you are flawed and defective. But you see, when you are an infant, you learn that message. But when you learn it as a teenager, it's more potent and it has more impact. You understand the teaching better than when you were very small as a child or an infant. The cause of shame, abandonment, denial, rejection, too busy, no time, etc. Yes, it is devastating for an infant or a lost a parent through death or divorce or through deserting or through emotional abandonment or physical abuse, etc. It is devastating as a child. It is darn right scary for a child. But when a teenager loses through abandonment, maybe not through death, but emotional or physical abandonment, when they realize mother and father have given up on them, thrown them away, right, and have turned their attention to a younger sibling or an older sibling or a different lover, that abandonment hurts and cuts a deeper, more potent level than as a child went through. A child feels dad went to heaven, or daddy left for another person, or daddy is too busy for me. But a teenager feels it more potently, deeper, and the impact is more powerful. And combined with that, the teenager is supposed to handle it better. When a 3-year-old loses a father to divorce, death, or works too much, all the relatives are concerned. But when a 15-year-old loses a parent to divorce or death, or the dad overworks, you are practically grown up. You can handle it. No one pays attention to you. Just get over it. Life goes on. The hurt is just as deep, if not deeper, in many ways, because they understand the abandonment and the emotions that surround it more than a child does. So what does shame do to you? For some of you, the shame begins in adolescence. But when it does, it is not called shame. Some of you look at shame and the impacts of shame and say, oh, I have those effects. I feel separate from myself. I feel separate from God, goddess of all it is. I can't ask for help. I won't let myself receive it, even if I ask for it. I do feel that I am flawed and defective. It's been my secret, but I do feel it in that regard. Yeah, I don't have those human gifts in that regard. I don't think or feel that way. I don't perceive and conceive. It should be a gift. And out of all that effects of shame, I probably have shame. I look to my infancy. I see my parents were not superhuman or subhuman. They didn't teach me to be flawed, defective, and not good enough. No one abandoned or rejected anyone. It was a nice nuclear family, even emotionally. They were good people. They did their best. It wasn't perfect, but hey, they did their best. There was no abuse, physical, emotional, or mental abuse. There was no sexual abuse. Maybe we could have been more open and talkative, but hey, I wasn't wronged in my infancy or childhood. Well, something must have happened to me when I was an infant or child. How else can I explain the shame that I feel? We create a fantasy of why I feel this way. You see, sometimes the shame don't show up in infancy or show up in childhood, but it came in the adolescent and smacks you. You see, in the adolescent years, when your superhuman parents demand it of you, or your subhuman parent gives you the implied implication that you're going to turn out just like the old man or like your mother, this is considered a rude awakening that is considered a part of growing up. When you're abused, it is called discipline. When you're abusive, it's called concern. When they wrong you, they are called stupid, idiotic parents, but no one says it's shame. When indeed a father hits a son or daughter, or when he rants and rages and rips up her clothes because she spends too much money on this wardrobe of stupid things, who does she think she is? Or when a dad destroys your video game machine because you spend too much time on it and don't want to work, that's not called shameful behavior. That's not called shame-inducing behavior. That's called just an upset father. Too much on his mind, too much pressure. He is working too much. I better be nicer, give him space, and not make him angry. Or when a mother gets the spoon and hits the son or daughter, or slaps the hands, or washes the mouth out with soap, or grounds son or daughter, or beats son or daughter, etc. That's not called shameful behavior. That's not called shame-inducing behavior. That's called just an upset mother. Too much on her mind, too much pressure. She is working around the house and at work too much. I better be super nice. Give her space, seek her approval, acceptance, be quiet, not make her angry. So a lot of times the shame begins in the adolescent years. It's called concern, or over-concern, or rude awakening, or something you are supposed to be able to handle, okay? And should not have any damage or impact on you, but it does. It's shame just as much of you where you're 2 years old, or 3 years old, or 5 years old, or 7-year-old. Ironically, it's more damaging but less acknowledged. What does shame do to you? It appears into the function of growing up, but it still does the damage. Many of you will miss shame because you call it crazy, stupid parents, or over-concerned parents, or rude awakening, or just the way life works. If those same things happened to you while you were 6 years old, you would have known them as shame, and you would have got to work on your shame. You would clear it out. You would not have to look for some fantasy of abuse and would be able to deal with the truth and clear it out. And that is what shame does. It shows up for the first time. It often evaporates or becomes invisible. Accumulative shame shifts, often shame shifts during these adolescent years. It can become more overt or covert. As you were growing up, what covert or overt things did your mom or dad do to you in your teenage years? Okay? Accumulative shame shifts, often shame shifts during these adolescent years. Can become more overt or more openly, plainly or readily apparent, not secret or hidden. A father who would not be considered dealing with a daughter or a son, but now they are a teenager. Maybe they just might sexually abuse or physically abuse. It's alright to hit my teenage son because he is practically as tall as I am. It would be perverse to him when he is 6, showing a deliberate desire to behave in a way that is unreasonable or unacceptable, often despite the consequences. But he is 16 and I have the right to punch him. I'm his father, and it's still physical abuse, and the impact is you feel defective or flawed just as much as when you were 6 years old. Maybe it won't break as many bones, but it will break as much as your heart, and even more. It can become overt. Often now I am going to demand I let you be a screw-up child for your childhood, but now that you are a teenager, you better become that superhuman I have been patiently waiting for you to become, or accepted you will be just as rotten as your old man and the subhuman behavior, or as your old lady and her mother and her subhuman behavior. Also, another overt is parents wanting their kids to grow up too soon. Here, the parents are always asking and watching when their kid's puberty is coming in. Example, the father may ask the child, do you have armpit hair yet? How about pubic hair, facial hair? when are you going to be a man, etc. And for the mother to the daughter, moms tend to get push-up bras for their daughters even way before puberty has even started. Mothers do this usually to avoid embarrassing moments for their daughters at school with their friends. We don't want your friends to see you are a late bloomer. Let's get you a push-up bra so you can be a big girl. When we want our kids to grow up so that they do not get picked on, we are only shaming them another way by saying, hurry up, be a man, get some hair on you, grow some boobs. When you get your moon time, then you will be a woman. Don't want your friends to bug you about being underdeveloped, do we? All of a sudden, things become more overt, and abuse can become overt. The sexual abuse can be in being wrong, can become more overt or more openly, plainly, and readily apparent, not secret or hidden. It can also become more covert. It can shift and become more covert, not openly acknowledged or displayed. No more does mom push you about college, education, and knowledge, and becoming a doctor or whatever accomplishment your mother demands of you. Now it's silence. That look you get, oh, a bee, oh, and then a heavy breath that wiggles and squirms inside you and eats your guts out. At 6, they may have screamed and yelled for you to be more, but now that it's heavy breathing, sighing, eye rolling, shoulder shrugging. It doesn't look like shame, does it? She did not haul me off and punch me or yell at me and scream at me. I wish she would have. I could have taken that. I could have fought back against that. I could have screamed back to that. But what can you do to an eye roll or a deep breath or disapproval? Don't do that to me. That teenager says. Mom says, do what? I'm just breathing. You overreactive teenager, do what? Now you become the abuser. It can become more covert. Sexual abuse is more covert. The parent wants to know every intimate detail of the child's sexuality. Parents can say, I'm just concerned about AIDS. You can be concerned about AIDS without wondering where he touched you. Where and what did he say? What did he do? How did it feel? Has nothing to do with AIDS. Do you enjoy sex with him? Has nothing to do with AIDS or other types of diseases. It can be too personal. Not always, but can be too personal and invasive and abusive. Significant and enough times, mothers can get very jealous of their daughters. She is perky and young. She doesn't have cottage cheese, cellulite, that bitch. She doesn't have stretch marks all over her belly and her ass. If she had given birth to a child like I did, she would. She has all these 16 and 17-year-old studs, those hunks hanging around her. Mother's like, I have saggy breasts. I have cottage cheese that is growing up on my hips. I have stretch marks on my stretch marks. And I have that hairy older man over there who doesn't even give me the time of the day. I would not mind having some 20-year-old blonde, blue eyes, hunk, or some tall, dark, and handsome 17-year-old hanging around me. Also, some mothers demand to be their daughter's girlfriends, to be one of the girls, to hang out at their parties, are often jealous, and in their jealousy can become abusive, sexually, physical, mentally, or emotionally. Fathers, similarly, can get very jealous with their sons. He is a younger, and he has all of these younger girls with perky bodies, and I have her. I wish all these younger girls would pay attention to me. Dad says I'm not bad. I still got it. I have it. And they can get jealous of their sons. They can get even competitive. Size is it all in getting in a competitive world. Fear of their son is more of a man than a dad. If they are bigger than dad, God forbid it, that son could be in for a lot of abuse. Not every father does this, but some of you went through this and wondered what was wrong with you. That your father made fun of you because you were more of a man than him, hung like a horse, or whatever the phrase. Your dad can make you feel ashamed and embarrassed about this. Is this abuse? Yes, this is abuse. It can be more overt, you see. The mother that bursts into the washroom. Oops, I didn't know you were in here. The mother that has to clean your room and go through every drawer between the mattresses, between every sweater on the shelf. Do they know about those places too? Yes. This type of covert abuse is an invasion. Or the mother that wants you to keep your bedroom door open when you have guys or girls over. She listens to your laughs and talking. The mother also continually walks by pretending to be doing laundry or house chores, but is peeking in and eavesdropping to see what's going on in there. You can feel your mom better not having sex or getting pregnant. I raised you better than that. As you were growing up, that covert or overt things did your mom or dad do to you in your teenage years? Another thing that can happen with the accumulative shift of the accumulated shame is that it stops. That sometimes can be the most devastating of all. Not that it is far over, but stops. Can some instances be like a traffic jam? Bam! Come slap you from behind with what is happening. Father who uses to sneak into your bedroom, however, now no longer does, due to the fact that this is dirty, disgusting, filthy, or perverse, displaying a planned and obstinate preference to act in a manner that is unreasonable or unacceptable, regularly despite the consequences. What does that make you? Dirty and disgusting with disgrace. Also the parent that doesn't come and say, I have been emotionally, mentally, and physically abusing you all these years, and I'm sorry. Not that we expect they would, but when they stop just like that, you end up upholding all the shame from the beatings and molestation. When it stops, it's like the air conditioning when it cuts off and you realize how loud it was. The abuse or abandonment stops. It is a rear ending that pounds up against yourself when all of a sudden you're hammered with the truth, which you were engaging and participating in shameful behavior all of these years. What does that make of you? This is what can happen with an accumulation of shame when it shifts overt to covert or it stops. The panic of growing up makes the teenage years unique. Also, the panic of growing up in the whole psychology and biology of sex, sexuality, sexual preference, and teenagers have to deal with that. Go talk to your mom and dad. Are you crazy? They may teach you about the birds and the bees, but the biological function, who puts that where and when, well, they may hopefully now talk about sexually transmitted diseases, AIDS, herpes, etc. It may help the teenager get pills or condoms and teach them all about the stuff, but you're not going to go to talk to them about sexual preferences, about sexuality, sexual identity. You're not going to talk to them about this, and during that time maybe some can, but most cannot. And during that time, the whole slot of the biology and the psychology just months ago for some of you girls were yuck. Now you can't get them off your mind. Boys were disgusting, dirty, smelly animals. Now that's sexy. How do you deal with that? It doesn't happen gradually. They are a little bit sexy this semester, next semester they're a little bit sexier. It happens all of a sudden. Oh gosh, to have them. I gotta have one in bed now. Every teenager feels and has to deal with the biology and psychology of sex, sexuality, and sexual identity. That's the panic of growing up. Combined with that is the intensity of emotions, which is discouraged by parents and society. And you have to be so dramatic. Yes, absolutely. They must be that dramatic. If not, pinch them and poke them and make them be that dramatic. They need that sense of drama, that sense of intensity. If they don't have it, something is askew. Maybe not the drama that is destructive, but every teenager needs to have passion and depth of intensity. And if they don't, something is askew. Nobody wants them to. Nobody wants teenagers to be teenagers. Why don't you grow up? Why don't you act like an adult? Because they are not. Parents may say, you were so cute when you were little. You were so cooperative. You always did everything I said. Thank God they aren't there anymore. Are going to have them there at 35 doing everything you say, sitting on your lap. You don't want that. Well, maybe some do, but nonetheless, you don't want that. So seldom are they allowed to be teenagers. So now we have a more potent time of shame plus the panic of growing up. And if this was enough, at the same time, they put you in high school, okay? Shame is one of the very few, if not the only malady that requires both the asking for and the receiving of help from someone more, or someone who is physical perhaps, or who is more, not better than, but more capable. The shame-based person has the most difficulty of anyone for asking for help, but yet they must. Beyond asking, there is this other part that people tend to forget, and a lot of you forget, and that is the receiving. You may say, but I've asked for help. I've asked my higher self dozens of times. I asked God, Goddess of all it is. I have talked to the ancient ones. I have talked to this one. I have talked to that one. Every co-creator I can imagine. I've asked, and nothing is happening. Did you ever stop to receive it? Oh, asking is not enough? Is that what you're saying exactly? I can ask? That's a big step for a shame-based person. No, question is the receiving part that gets particularly muddy if it could only just ask, but I also must be willing to receive that help. Because the difficulty many of you have with your shame is it is too difficult to deal with. We point out examples and we use them as examples of what we mean, but shame is more intricate, more difficult, more perplexed deal with than some other melodies. Not to give you an excuse, not to give you a license. Chris said it was. No, we talk of it so that you realize the reason your shame is so difficult to deal with. It is that it is shame. These difficulties are a phenomenon, are a function of shame, not of your defect and not of your flaw. Shame is not static. Shame is dynamic. It doesn't just happen once or over a defined period of time and hurt you for the rest of your life. No, it would be nice perhaps, and some like to think that it is that way, but shame keeps happening. It's not static. It's not that I was just abused or I was abandoned or I was somehow wrong during this time in my life and it wasn't before that and then stopped and wasn't after that. It's not as though it is contained. It keeps happening over and over and over again. Shame comes in 4 distinct waves. The first occurs between the time 18 months to 36 months and time, and it's called the terrible twos, but the time when shame is first apparent in the preverbal, even though you have limited language, that preverbal time. Then it comes again around 6 or 8 years old, and some between 10 and 12 years old, when you make the first break from mother and attach yourself to father, whether he is present or not, or if he can handle it or not, those often resulting in a contract, the psychic contracts of pain. But shame doesn't stop there. It continues to where we will focus on those adolescent years, usually associated with puberty around but that time. The unique adolescent years of the loneliness, the withdrawal, the hiding, the avoiding, the wanting to run from everything, the feeling of being flawed and defective, not good enough, stupid, the pressure, scared, or how you withdrew from school, pressures to drugs and porn to find freedom, how you cheated your way through, only focused on escape, not growth, the puberty shame, and then it doesn't stop there. It comes in more waves. The adult onset shame that can occur at any time during the grown-up years and leave you crippled, overwhelmed, on the fence of your life, lonely, hate your errors, incorrect with grievous mistake. I'm sorry, overwhelmed with anxiety, catch yourself panicking, constantly panicking, catch yourself feeling with worry, drenched in absolute battle of righteousness. Don't you know how to do this? Seeing your own self-hate, your own self-punishment, belittling yourself. If I said anything wrong, I would be hard on myself. Applying for a job and do not feel good enough. Seeking revenge or wanting to carry it out. Go to get even. Rage, spitefulness, revenge them, for they should know better. Helpless, impotent, feel separate, lonely, never happily unstable, never will be, never have been. Try to run but freeze and can't move, get jealous, hate, anger, envy, vengeance, feel you can't be helped, loner, loser, failure of your life fully expressed, I must be fixed, prepare to be whole, but never be whole, etc. It comes in these 4 distinct waves, not just once and it's over and hopefully you can go back and deal with it, but it keeps happening. And if one level goes unattended, it tends to accumulate and then it becomes too heavy and too difficult to deal with. The current trend of dealing with shame is to focus on one wave and one wave only. Don't get us wrong. We are tremendously blessed and glad there are people out there dealing now with shame, diving into shame and starting to heal it, whether one wave or all waves of shame. We are glad people are talking about the shame the way we are talking about it. Yes, many people are talking about shame, but they tend to focus on and teach about how to deal with one wave of shame. They do it beautifully and successfully, and they clear and release the shame that came from the abuse when they were 6 months to 2 to 5 or 10 years old, from the abandonment, rejection, denial, or what they were taught, alcoholic parents. They succeed, and many of you have done that as well. However, you often find your success sabotaged by the unintended levels because I cleared out the fact I was abused and abandoned 3, and there I think I'm done with shame, but then I get hit in the back of the head with what happened at 7 or 10 or 15 or 33. I get sabotaged by the unintended levels of shame, and I feel I didn't do it good enough. I really am flawed. I really am defective. I went to so-and-so healing or workshop that's guaranteed to work, and it didn't work for me. Why? Because you did not deal with all 4 breaks or waves of shame that one experiences in their life. It's not enough to spin on one plate. You've got to get all 4 spinning and keep the spinning until you're done with the shame. Also, the reason for some that is so particularly difficult to work with shame requires intensity and patience. It requires not just feeling the anger, but instead feeling anger and the intensity and the depth of the rage, the anger holds. It's not just feeling a little bit hurt, it's feeling the intensity and the depth of the hurt. It's not just about being afraid, but to get to the very bone chill quickening of the frightening, shaking feelings. It's not just loneliness, it's the emptiness and deep hole of loneliness. It's not just despair, it's the deep intensity of the despair. One must touch it's not just the hopelessness, but it is the gut empty helplessness. It's not just the raw shame itself, but it is the crippling depth of shame. The intensity must be felt as not only intensity, but patience. Not just sitting back and waiting, for rather paying attention to detail, listening with intensity, listening with a passion to what you learn of yourself in your shame. You see, a lot of people are afraid of intensity and afraid of patience, and society tends to discourage both intensity and patience. And therefore, many learn of the shame but don't follow through. They just don't do it completely and follow through. You see, after you identify the shame or see a healer and the shame is triggered, go to your room or forest or sit quietly somewhere and spend hours feeling the intensity of shame, crying, and maybe not knowing there is that much pain inside the reservoir of shame. It takes that kind of intensity and patience. The point is, for some, the feeling, that intensity, and the patience that is required, therefore learn of, but don't know and can't release, and seems it's never to be done. The foundation of remorse is given to you in infancy, but for most it was removed, and it is in the teenage years that remorse becomes real or not real. In the teenage years, you don't just feel that I am not human. I feel and think that I cannot make mistakes. You become defensive or defenseless, and you become hopeless and helpless, and you become arrogant and ignorant. You see, in the teenage years, you don't just say I'm unforgivable, you are unforgiving. A martyr, self-pity, a victim, a blamer, and a struggler. What happens in the teenage years is the foundation of remorse is removed. What happens is you don't get feelings like a human being, that you can make mistakes and learn from them, that you are forgivable to yourself and others, that you can be prepared or organized and not prepared and not organized. You don't get a sense that your needs and wants are valuable, important, necessary, and worth having. And you don't get any sense you can create your dreams out of action, just reaction, that you don't have a basis for any authentic character. You don't have a basis for principle and ideas. You don't have a basis for the depth of your spirituality. And that this foundation of remorse is given to you in infancy, the ingredients of remorse, but it is in the teenage years that remorse becomes real or not real to you. You don't decide, I am not prepared to deal with life. You just start controlling others to cover up the fact that you are totally unprepared. You start bullying. You start guilt tripping. You start guilt motivation and guilt manipulating. You start controlling through mind games. You become confused about your needs and wants. You become totally disoriented outside validating. You live in delusions and sometimes schizophrenia, trying to please everybody that never yourself, which is a shame contract. Take care of others before you take care of yourself. It's not just that you feel that you can never act on your own. You become and continue living in your delusions over and over again. Someday when I get my lucky break and things go my way, you see, you don't just have a lack of character, you don't have any character or no principles or ideals upon which to build character on. It's not that you are just separated from your spirituality, you're always chasing rainbows that don't have a pot of gold. You're always wanting the greener pasture. You are never satisfied. You're always looking for the ideal person, ideal reality, the ideal circumstances that will somehow let your life work, but does it? You see, the remorse isn't just some abstraction. It's an important foundation in your teenage life, or just life in general, that is lacking and is now a tangibility that is missing. That those of you who are now knowing I am totally defenseless person, if anybody begins to criticize you and you put up your shield that began in those years. Yes, in infancy, the foundation of remorse wasn't there. And in the teenage years, the actual remorse was missing before you became defensive. You became a controlling person, and you became this manipulative person. And now, how can I stop? This is what shame did to you. It's not your nature of the human condition. Your defensiveness is a byproduct of shame. It not only robbed you of your foundation, but it stripped you of remorse. That you ended up defensive, arrogant, controlling, martyring, living in delusions, living in pretentious, exaggerated outward show without the character, always waiting for the big break that was somehow going to indicate all that has transpired. Not that all of you have that, no, but to the extent that part of it is there. It is not a weird phenomenon. It's the lack of remorse that was robbed by shame. Your shame can be finally lifted by your higher self or God Goddess of all that is, or whatever form of representation that comes to you. And I can also assist you in personal healing sessions to lift your shame. You can reach me at www.miraculite.com or www.miraculitehealing.com for all your healing needs. And click the link button, the subscribe button, to receive more future videos from me. So what does shame do to you? These difficulties are a phenomenon, are a function of shame, not of your defect and not of your flaw. You are worthy of what you seek. Transform your shame. Transform it. This is Chris Parr, and thank you for listening to me today. Syrian and Lemurian Wisdoms and Teachings.